Welcome to my channel Sella Buzz. In the shadows of the Vatican, a secret was waiting to be found before his death. Pope Francis left behind something that would shake the foundations of the Catholic Church, a hidden letter addressed to Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. This wasn't just any letter. This was a message that remained hidden until after the Pope's passing, a message that could change everything we know about the future leadership of the Catholic Church. What did Pope Francis say in those private pages was this: his final wish for who should lead. Next, the answer might surprise you, and it's about to be revealed. For the first time, the world was still in shock when the Vatican confirmed Pope Francis had passed away shortly after an appearance during Easter weekend, the holiest time on the Christian calendar, as millions of Catholics around the world mourned. Something unexpected happened behind the Vatican walls. A letter written by Pope Francis himself was discovered in the archives. This wasn't just addressed to anyone. It was specifically written to Cardinal Luis Antonio, a man many believe could shape the future of Catholicism for years. People talked about this letter in whispers. Some said it was lost, while others said it never existed. Now we know the truth, and it's much more powerful than anyone thought. The letter wasn't sealed with an official Vatican stamp or marked with formal declarations. Instead, it contains something much more meaningful: personal guidance from Pope Francis to a man he clearly trusted deeply. Vatican insiders who have seen the letter say it's full of wisdom, hope, and what seems to be a vision for the Church's future. The timing of this discovery is hard to ignore. Why would such an important letter show up at a time when the Church is going through its most uncertain time? The answer points to Pope Francis, who always thought 3 steps ahead and knew that his words would be most important when the Church was at a crossroads. What makes this letter truly extraordinary isn't what it says, but the relationship behind it. Luis Antonio Tagle didn't come from money or power. He grew up on the busy streets of Manila, Philippines, where faith wasn't practiced in grand cathedrals, but through everyday acts of kindness and service. This background immediately connected him with Pope Francis, who also came from humble beginnings and kept that view throughout his papacy. Both men had a vision of a church that walks with its people instead of standing above them. When Francis first met Tagle, people close to both say they felt a bond because they shared values and a vision for the Church. He leads with his heart, not his rank, Francis once said about Tagle in a private meeting with Vatican officials. This wasn't just words of praise, it was recognition of a leadership style that Francis had developed over the years. In 2019, Pope Francis made Tagle head of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, which is one of the most important jobs in the Vatican. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a clear sign that Francis was getting closer to Tagle, trusting him more, and maybe getting him ready for something more open. The letter, which was written in Pope Francis's unique handwriting, contained not only personal but also possibly important information. The letter was full of wisdom that went beyond easy advice. The Church is for people who want to help, not people who want power. Francis wrote that these weren't just nice words. They showed a clear vision for Catholic leadership that put humility above all else and compassion above all else. The Pope talked about accepting necessary change while keeping important practices alive, finding that fine line that defined his time as leader. But one line in the letter stands out: Luis, you understand the hearts of the people. Never forget that the future needs leaders who carry mercy in both hands. While Francis never directly named Tagle as his chosen successor, which would have been against Vatican protocol, the message was clear. This wasn't just mentoring, it was preparation. The letter also talked about global issues that were important to both men, like poverty, migration, environmental care, and the need for interfaith conversation. It wasn't a political document, but rather a spiritual guide for getting through the hard times that were coming. Cardinal Tagle is remarkable not only for his relationship with Pope Francis, but also for how he responded to this extraordinary letter. When he first got it, he didn't tell everyone about it or use it to boost his status. Instead, he replied in his usual humble way, "I am just a servant of God." When asked about the letter's contents, Tagle reportedly told a close friend that Tagle saw it as a reminder of his responsibility, while others might have seen it as a way to get power. People who know him say he spent several days in prayer after reading the letter, seeking divine guidance rather than human recognition. This response perfectly shows why Pope Francis had so much faith in Tagle, even though rumors were flying about him. Tagle kept focusing on humanitarian work, interfaith dialogue, and helping communities in need. The Church must always be with the people, especially in times of struggle, he reminded his congregation in a recent sermon. For Tagle, the letter wasn't about getting ahead personally, but about continuing a shared mission to bring the Church closer to the people it serves, especially those on the edges of society. Today's Catholic Church is at a very important juncture. Attendance is falling, and traditional strongholds are being attacked. Scandals and calls for modernization have caused problems that have never been seen before. Pope Francis understood these problems better than most, and he pushed for a church that balanced needed changes with ideals that will never go out of style. Francis wrote in his letter to Cardinal Tagle, "The Church must not fear change when it serves love and truth." This letter comes at a time when there is a lot of confusion and needs direction the most. This wasn't just advice to a friend, it was a plan for how to deal with the uncertain future of Catholicism. Word of this letter quickly spread through the Vatican, making people both excited and worried. For progressive Catholics, younger clergy, and millions of believers in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, Tagle is a sign of hope and a continuation of Francis's vision for a more inclusive and socially engaged church. His focus on poverty, climate change, and migration speaks to a new generation of believers who want their faith to address real-world problems. However, more conservative groups in the Vatican are wary of his rise because they see his willingness to dialogue and stress on mercy over strict doctrine as possible departures from tradition. This kind of split isn't new. As Pope, Francis met similar opposition as he tried to make the Church more open to everyone while still upholding basic Catholic beliefs. The letter to Tagle shows that Francis knew these tensions would last long after he was gone. By mentoring Tagle so closely, he was trying to make sure his vision would live on. Many Vatican analysts now think that this was exactly his goal, not to go against church procedures, but to strengthen a certain way of leading and teaching faith for years. In public, Pope Francis was careful about what he said, but there was one phrase that has become more important since the letter was found. At the time, many people thought this was just a sign of appreciation. Now, it sounds like Francis was planning Tagle's succession on purpose. During his time as Pope, Francis put Tagle in positions of increasing importance, which put him on the world stage and gave him experience dealing with sensitive church issues, like talking to world leaders about humanitarian crises or representing the Vatican in interfaith dialogues. There is a message in Francis's letter that theologians and Vatican observers are still trying to figure out. The Church needs shepherds, not rulers. Francis wrote those who walk with the people, not ahead of them. This wasn't just friendly advice, it was a vision for leadership. The Catholic Church follows strict traditions when choosing a pope, but Francis wasn't limited by them. His whole papacy was focused on bringing new life into old halls. That's why this letter feels so important. It doesn't directly name Tagle as a successor, but it makes it clear that he knows how to move forward. Near the end of the letter, "Luis, remember that leadership is service. When the time comes, let love guide you, not ambition," is one of the most telling lines. Those words carry weight not because they crowned Tagle, but because they prepare him. Many now believe this letter represents Francis' quiet endorsement of a leadership style he hoped would continue after his death. One centered on compassion, inclusion, and genuine service to humanity's most vulnerable members as the Catholic Church moves forward from Pope Francis's death. This letter stands as perhaps his final teaching, not issued through formal channels, but through personal connection. It reminds us that even in an institution built on tradition and hierarchy, change often happens through relationships, through trust passed from one generation to the next. What happens next remains uncertain. The Church will follow its established processes for selecting new leadership, but Francis's letter to Tagle has already made its mark, reminding the world that even popes are human, with hopes and concerns for what they leave behind. This mysterious letter reveals something profound about both men, that true leadership isn't about titles or power, but about vision and values. Whether Cardinal Tagle becomes head of the Catholic Church or keeps working in other roles, his trust by Pope Francis says a lot about both of them and about what's important in faith and leadership. The letter shows that in a world obsessed with power, the most powerful thing might be humility, leading not from above but from below and carrying mercy in both hands. What will you keep in mind about this strange story? Maybe it's because the most powerful messages aren't always yelled from balconies, but rather whispered from heart to heart. Pope Francis knew that change doesn't always need loud statements. Sometimes it needs quiet guidance. One faithful servant gave careful advice and trust to another. As the world watches what happens next in the Vatican, remember this secret letter and its strong message that the future of faith might not belong to those who lead with power, but to those who lead with love.